Just a little bit about me. I've been in managed care for about 15 years, mostly with government programs, including Medicare and Medicaid. My clinical background is in palliative and hospice medicine, largely for kids. I graduated from Harvard and then NYU School of Med, and then got an MBA at the University of South Florida while I was living in Florida for a couple of years. So it was very nice to meet you. So the first question about heart health, and it is Heart Health Month, Heart Health Awareness, is that heart disease is the leading cause of death for men, women, and people of most racial and ethnic groups in the U.S. One person dies every 33 seconds from cardiovascular disease, and there are about 800,000 deaths per year in the United States. Economically, it costs about $250 billion every year to manage heart disease, including health care, medications, and lost productivity due to early death. And more than 1.5 million people in the US suffer from heart attacks and strokes per year. And as I mentioned, about 800,000 deaths per year. So given the profound impact of heart disease on our lives and the economy, it's really important to prioritize your heart health and to take proactive steps to prevent and manage cardiovascular conditions. So the good news is this graph on the right shows that over time, the death rates have continued to fall from cardiovascular disease as well as stroke. And on the bottom are some of the leading indicators on our timeline from the 1950s, when cardiovascular disease was first the leading cause of death in the US, to public health campaigns to improve medical treatment, a bit of recent slowing in the mortality or death rates, and over time it continues to get slower and slower. Here are some of the risk factors, and some of them are what I would call things that you can mitigate, the things you can make better, and there's some of them that we unfortunately have no control over. So in the things we can control department, number one is smoking. So if you're a smoker, we need to stop. The story on alcohol is very interesting because if you read any magazines or newspapers, the role of alcohol in either harming or protecting from cardiovascular disease continues to change over time. I think just like anything else, too much is too much for your heart. Stress is very important. Unhealthy foods are very important. Diabetes, if you have diabetes, is a risk factor for advanced heart disease. And the good news there is it is controllable. And so there is evidence that the better your diabetic control might be, the lower your chances over time of having significant heart disease. Genetics we can't control for, and there are family risk factors and family genetic traits that can predispose you to heart disease. Age is another. We still don't know how to cure getting older. High cholesterol is something we can control. Again, there are some genetic conditions that make your cholesterol higher. And obesity is another one. And you're probably aware, Andrea, that in the United States, obesity has reached epidemic proportions. And whether that's related to our activity or more likely to ultra-processed foods, about a third of Americans are currently considered to be obese. And that's a big risk factor for heart disease. Some other things, as I mentioned, family history of premature heart disease. So if there is a family member who's had a heart disease at a young age, so under 45, your risk is higher. High cholesterol is important. So you want to have good levels of what we call still the good cholesterol or HDL and lower levels of the bad cholesterol, LDL. Metabolic syndrome goes along with obesity as part of the epidemic. And this is an interesting combination of obesity, high fats in the blood, high blood pressure, and high blood sugar. And that combination, called metabolic syndrome, significantly increase your risk of having heart disease. Kidney disease is important for your heart. A couple of reasons. The first is that kidneys excrete from the blood from your body toxins and things that can harm your heart. But it also is a prime regulator of blood pressure. So if your kidneys are not working well and your blood pressure is high, you've got a risk of heart disease. And high blood pressure is a silent killer. Most people have absolutely no symptoms of it. So getting to your primary care provider for blood pressure checks is important. And we'll come back in a few minutes to some of the screening tests. There are chronic inflammatory conditions like psoriasis that can increase your risk, premature menopause before age 40, pregnancy-associated conditions, and then high-risk race and ethnicity. So we know from recent statistics that people of South Asian or African American descent have a higher risk of developing heart disease as well. So a couple of things you should know about your heart, and I find this to be absolutely incredible that your heart every day beats about 100,000 times and pumps 1.5 gallons of blood per minute through the body. Just imagine if your car could do that every day for however long we might live. Let's say we're lucky and live to 100. That's a lot of pumping. The size of your heart matters. It should normally be about the size of your fist and weighs between 8 and 12 ounces. The heart has its own wiring system. So, you know, Andrew, we have nerves in our bodies that carry signals that help our muscles to move and to respond to the environment, like when you touch something hot. The heart has its own internal system that generates the signals to make it beat. And the really curious fact is that if the heart, for some reason, is actually removed, so for example, if you're having a heart transplant, the heart itself will continue to beat outside of the body. So it's a sort of self-contained world that has a pump and a power supply to keep it going. The heart also has a network of its own blood vessels, and you may have heard of coronary arteries that supply it with oxygen and nutrients. And again, heart disease is the #1 leading cause of death in the United States. So your heart is located under your rib cage between your lungs. The size of the heart varies depending on age, size, and condition. And again, as I mentioned, there are 3 basic systems that keep it going: the pumps, the wiring, and the energy sources. And I see someone else has joined us. Good afternoon. So here's how the pump works. And this is a very complicated diagram, but basically, again, the pump takes oxygen-rich blood from your lungs, puts it in a pump called the left ventricle. That's a pumping chamber, and it pumps all the way out through your aorta to the rest of your body. And so as the blood goes to the body, your body's very smart and can remove the oxygen and the nutrients to help you stay healthy. And then that, what we call blue blood, or you may have heard that term, comes back to the right side of the heart, and that pumps to the lungs. And so the lungs are critical for heart function as well. So your blue blood goes to the lungs, it gets rid of the waste that you breathe out and brings in oxygen that then goes back into the circulation. And again, think about the magic of this, doing it 100,000 times a day. It's a pretty extraordinary system. So the spark is the electrical system that I mentioned. And so the electrical signals start up here in the receiving part of the heart called the atria. They go down these nerve pathways to the pumps. And when this fires, when this goes off, the pumps will squeeze. And this is another remarkable electrical system. And we'll talk about ways in which the electrical system can stop working well. And then finally, as I mentioned, there's energy that goes to the heart. And so the major blood vessel, you may have heard of this, called the aorta, is the one that brings blood from the heart to the rest of the body, but also through 2 big, a right side and a left side coronary artery actually brings blood to the heart itself. And so those wrap around the outside of the heart and give blood so that the pump can continue to work. Let me just do something here. All right. Nope, that's not going to work. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so heart disease or pump failure can be caused by a weakening or failing of the pump. And there are two ways that can happen. One is that the pump itself weakens, and the other is you think about how a pump works, even in, for example, your car. If a pipe that takes the liquid away from the pump gets clogged, it makes it much harder for that pump to work. That's where high blood pressure becomes a problem for your pump, because the pump is facing very high resistance to get blood out. So if the pump doesn't work, blood backs up. And this is what we call congestive heart failure. Congestive meaning your body or your lungs get congested or filled with fluid. And so the downside of that is your body doesn't get enough oxygen or nutrients, and that's what explains some of the symptoms that we'll talk about. So heart failure costs the nation about $31 billion. I'm sure this has been updated since 2012. The number of U.S. citizens who have heart failure in the U.S. is about 7 million, and about 14% of all deaths in the U.S. come from heart failure. So this is a very significant health problem. So here are some of the symptoms. You can get short of breath because the blood is sort of pooling in your lungs. Your heart can go faster because it's trying to work against that resistance. You can gain weight, and sometimes you may notice your doctor checking to see if your ankles are swollen, and that's why they do that. Because your body's not getting enough oxygen and nutrients, you can get very tired. You may need to pee a lot, particularly at night. You may lose your appetite. You may actually have chest pain. And again, your legs and ankles may get swollen. So these are some of the warning signs of heart failure. So if we go to the wiring part of the heart, there are situations where the whole electrical system doesn't work. It either doesn't fire, it fires at the wrong time, or the signals get jumbled. And when that happens, the pump can either pump too slow, too fast, or in rare circumstances, not at all. So any kind of irregular heartbeat we call an arrhythmia, and the most common one is called atrial fibrillation or AFib. So Andrew, have you heard of this before, of AFib?
Yes, I'm a nurse midwife. I'm very familiar with.
Oh, okay, great. Great. So about 12 million people will have AFib in the next decade, and again, it's a very common cause of death. So you may have heard of, I'm sure in your work you've heard of pacemakers, and so they're devices that can bypass the electrical system and fire from, for example, an outside battery. So here are the warning signs. Your heart can skip. You can faint. You can feel fluttering in your chest. You can be breathless, dizzy, or you can have chest pain. So when the fire burns out, when the coronary arteries get clogged, we call this coronary artery disease, or CAD, you can have a heart attack or a myocardial infarction. And if the blockage is severe enough, the heart muscle can die, and that's what we call a heart attack. The most common cause of blockage is called atherosclerotic plaque, and it's a buildup of fatty material inside the coronary arteries. And this is a place where your blood pressure becomes important. The fats that are circulating in your blood become important as well. And finally, there's an interesting and sad name for one particular type of heart attack, which is a critical blockage of the main artery on the left side. And this is called a widowmaker because this is the most life-threatening kind of heart attack. So let's look at some underlying causes and symptoms because, again, this is very, very important. Whoops, wrong one. So a little bit about heart attacks. Heart attacks can actually start at a very young age. In my previous life doing pediatrics, I treated kids who had heart attacks, who had some underlying conditions. About 1 in 20 adults, 20 and older, will have coronary artery disease. In the United States, someone has a heart attack every 40 seconds. And about 1 in 5 heart attacks are silent, which I find fascinating that such a critical organ can be damaged, but you might not actually be aware of it at the time that it's happening. One of the important things, and I think this has really become much better understood in the last 10 to 15 years, is that men and women actually experience can experience different symptoms with heart attacks. So in men, the sort of typical heart attack is I get very nauseous, I throw up, I feel very sweaty, I can't breathe, I have squeezing, tight pain or pressure in my chest, and it sometimes will radiate up the jaw and the neck or into the back. And so that is sort of the stereotypical heart attack where you see someone, particularly in movies and on TV, clutching their hearts and falling over. But in women, it can actually present differently. So women can actually have the same symptoms, but they don't always have chest pain. And sometimes the pain is in the belly. You may have more subtle signs like fainting and indigestion and fatigue. So if you look at that, sort of atypical symptoms that women have, like throwing up or being a little faint or some indigestion, it's much, much easier to miss early heart attack symptoms in women unless you or a healthcare provider or family member are thinking about that possibility for those women here. So the key here is that prevention is important. So better eating habits mean healthier hearts. And I'm sure you all know that a heart-healthy diet is very important. And that includes a variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, especially from poultry and fish, healthy oils, olive oil, canola oil, or sunflower oil are healthier, and minimally processed foods and limited alcohol intake. So there are probably some diet plans out there, and I'll go through one of them in a minute, that you may have heard of, like the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, sort of are structured ways of eating this way. My ultimate representation of a processed food would have to be a Twinkie. I bet that when people dig up our society 1,000 years from now, someone is going to dig up a Twinkie and it's going to be just as it was cooked. And that's because it has all of these highly processed sugars, salt, fats, artificial ingredients that make it look and smell good, but it's very, very, very bad for your health. Now, that said, changing diet is hard, so you can't necessarily do all this at one time, but these are good guidelines to discuss with your primary care provider. Care managers here at eternalHealth can help you get set up with nutrition support if you need to get you on a heart healthy path. So this again is a DASH diet, a dietary approach to stop hypertension or high blood pressure. And you'll see it's very similar to what I just showed as the sort of baseline of healthy eating for someone who's trying to reduce the risk of heart disease. So lots of grains, lean proteins, nuts, seeds, and legumes, fresh fruits and vegetables, low-fat dairy, and try to limit fats and sweets. The Mediterranean diet is very similar. It focuses a little more on fish as the lean protein source and a little bit more on healthy oils, so olive oil, olives, and so on. But again, you don't have to necessarily find a diet with a name on it to make yourself healthier. Food labels are important to understand. Calories do count, but they're not the only thing we should be looking at on the labels, despite the fact that they're the biggest thing you can see. But you want to look at fiber. So high fiber is very, very good. You have to be very aware of added sugars. So my example here is something like a sweet granola maybe has sugar from fruit or dried fruit in it. It's much better than something that has 20 grams of added sugar because that is much worse for your body. And the last thing, and maybe part of our obesity epidemic, is that our serving sizes, what people actually eat, is almost always bigger than the serving size that's shown on a food label. So we have to be very sensitive to what the serving size might be. Your heart beats better with less stress. And so stress is a normal response to things in the environment that tell us to get into a flight mode. But stress triggers a range of physical symptoms in the body. And I'm sure you've at some point experienced the headaches and aches and pains and stomach upset and rashes that can come from stress. It can reduce your energy, disrupt sleep, make you feel cranky and forgetful or out of control. And again, chronic stress is a major risk factor for heart disease. So there are lots of ways of managing stress, whether it's lifestyle changes, social supports, relaxation techniques, and again, care managers here at eternalHealth are willing and able to help you find resources for addressing stress. And you may have heard, Andrea, there are some apps out there. Some of them are free, like Insight Timer or Calm or Headspace, that allow you to access online through your phone a lot of these resources as well. So again, you can't go necessarily from a stressful life to a non-stressful life overnight, but it involves thinking about the things that you can do to move more, get better sleep, eat healthier. Maintaining social connections is critical, whether it be through community, through faith, however you stay connected to other people is part of how humans stay healthy. Relaxation techniques, positive attitude, and finding hobbies. Active hearts are very happy. So the recommendations now to get moving are a minimum of 150 minutes, just under 3 hours of moderate intensity activity per week. And I'll show you in a minute what some of those are. You can add muscle strengthening activities, and you don't need to be bench pressing 500 pounds. It could be as much as 1 pound, but just moving your muscles against something helps your heart to be healthy. Reducing sedentary or sitting time. So even if you're watching TV, stand up, move around, don't just sit. And then ultimately, you'd like to get to 300 minutes of activity per year. But I'm sorry, per week. But again, this is a spectrum. So pick one thing, stick to it until you're comfortable making that part of your physical activity, and then you can move ahead. Start small and gradually increase. So here are some of the moderate exercises. Tennis, I think, has been replaced in the universe by pickleball, which is really fun. Power walking, dancing is a great one. Water aerobics is fantastic, particularly if you have any muscle or joint issues. The water protects your joints, but you can still have aerobic activity. Swimming, light bike riding, running, and gardening is another very important activity. Vigorous activity means you're getting your heart rate really cranked up to your maximum, and the maximum depends on your age. But here again, light bike riding, tennis, jumping rope, running, hiking, swimming, soccer, digging in your garden or some of the day-to-day activities that we might not associate with exercise. So the point here is you don't have to go to the gym. You don't necessarily need a personal trainer to do all of these things to get yourself moving. And again, our care management team here has resources for you if you need help getting started in a fitness program. A smoke-free heart is a stronger heart. Quitting helps improve your overall health, not just from your cardiac point of view, but also your lungs and the rest of you. The cost of cigarettes has continued to increase. It's a very expensive habit. Quitting can improve your self-confidence. There are environmental benefits, and it reduces the heart disease risk. Quitting smoking is really hard, and it's never too late to quit. Support is available from many resources, including our care managers, to get you connected with smoke-free programs. The interesting thing, Andrew, is that if you look at the medical literature, the chances of quitting are much higher if you combine an over-the-counter smoking cessation smoking aid like nicotine patches or nicotine gum with specific smoking counseling. So those two together are very, very powerful agents to help you if you smoke. And again, what's fascinating about this is the benefits happen immediately. So very soon after you stop smoking, your heart rate drops, your carbon monoxide, your toxin levels in your blood drops to normal. Within a few weeks, your risk of heart attack drops. Within the first year, your breathing symptoms get better. And by a year after quitting, you actually cut your heart disease risk in half. If you stay off cigarettes for 5 to 15 years, your risk of coronary artery disease is the same as a non-smoker. And on top of that, I haven't mentioned that, and you probably know this, that smoking significantly increases the risk of lung cancer, but also other cancers that you may not think of, like cervical cancer or for men, prostate cancer. So smoking is not a good habit. So again, if you're ready to quit, have a plan, focus on your motivators, build confidence, manage your stress, learn from past experiences, because many people who try to quit have done it before. Find support and use the medications, some of which I mentioned, but everybody can quit. And again, your primary care provider, your care manager at Eternal Health, and many online resources, for example, from the American Lung Association, American Cancer Society, have all sorts of supports for people who want to quit smoking. You have to know your numbers. And so here, you have to have a plan for monitoring. You have to have a doctor who's comfortable checking you out for these couple of things that are important for measuring, and you should know them. So your blood pressure should be under 120/80. Your blood sugar should be normal when you are fasting. And what we call the A1C, and you may have heard of this, being in healthcare, should be less than 5.7%. And this is a measure of how much your body is exposed to sugar over time. These are the parameters for the different kinds of cholesterol that I mentioned. And I don't think anyone should have to remember these guidelines, but it's important to know that your doctor should be screening you annually for your blood cholesterol. And then a measure that's probably going away soon, the BMI or body mass index. It's a measure of body fat calculated using height and weight. And the new measure is called the BRI or body roundedness index, which doesn't take into account your weight. It takes into account how large your waist is. And so we now know that the more fat you carry around your midsection, the higher your risk of heart disease. So that is becoming quickly a much more important measure that physicians are adopting in the community called the body roundedness or BRI index. So here are some of the recommended health screenings by age, and this is not just necessarily for heart disease, but certainly in our younger years before 40, we should be having our cholesterol, an annual visit with our doctor, cervical cancer screening for women, and cholesterol once if it's normal and much more frequently if it isn't. As you progress into the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, you should have blood pressure, cholesterol check, a mammogram annually, colon cancer screening starting at age 45. That's decreased recently. It used to be 50. Your shingles vaccine, your flu vaccine, and your wellness visit. And we should add that you should also be receiving your COVID vaccines whenever they become available. 65 and over, again, very similar. You should be having blood pressure checks, the mammograms, colon cancer screening, and the new vaccine at this age is the pneumonia vaccine, as well as your annual wellness visit. So these are screening tests that you can review with your primary provider. You can review with our care managers here if you have questions about what to do and when to get them. So our team can do a lot to support you if you have questions about your heart health or anything else. So first, if you don't have a primary care provider, we can help you find one. If you need a specialist, we can help you find one. As I mentioned along the way, we can provide lots of support to you and guidance for lifestyle changes to make your health better, be it nutrition advice, issues with smoking, stress reduction. We also have available home monitoring devices. So if your doctor has identified, for example, that weight is a problem or blood pressure needs to be checked and a glucose meter needs to be checked, you can track your health progress. And so personal sharing with you, Andrea, I also have diabetes. And so I have a home blood pressure monitor. I have a glucose sugar monitor. I weigh myself regularly and I keep track of my numbers so that together my doctor and I know how well I'm doing. And then finally, very important to make sure you've received all of your preventive shots to stay healthy, including the flu, COVID, shingles, and pneumonia vaccines. So our care management team is ready and able to support you along your health journey. The phone number is here, but it's also in your welcome kit from the plan. There's information in there about care management as well. So I thank you for your time, Andrew. I want to make sure you have time to ask any questions that are on your mind.
Thank you. I don't have any questions.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us. We will be having a series of webinars during the year. I'll be talking again about colon cancer screening, which is very important, and there are others that you can find on our Eternal Health website. So with that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today, Andrea. I hope you were able to learn a little something. Like Bruce said, we'll have more of these. There's a few on our website right now you can RSVP to, or if you have any specific topics in mind that you would like to learn more about, feel free to give us a call or email us at marketing@eternalhealth.com and we'll put them on the schedule. And we'll send out this recording for you later on today.
Fantastic. Andrea, thank you again for joining us and have a very healthy rest of your day.